Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of We Rise Fighting Labor podcast, bringing you today's labor news, history, and analysis. I am here with my co-hosts and comrades, Brian.
Howdy, everyone.
And Jerry.
Hey, glad to be here.
And we are here bringing you this week's labor news. This is the podcast that you listen to with your coworkers, with your fellow union members, at your union hall, at your union meetings. We're going to bring you this week's labor news, and then we're going to get into a really cool interview that we had with Angaza Sababu Laughing House and Nathanette Mayo from the United Electrical Workers and Black Workers for Justice. That's after the news, and we will bring you the news right after this.
All right, so we have breaking news from Brazil this evening. Former President Lula da Silva has won the vote against the fascist Bolsonaro. A report from the AP, Associated Press, says, quote, Lula da Silva has done it again, 20 years after first winning the Brazilian presidency. The leftist defeated incumbent Bolsonaro Sunday in an extremely tight election that marks an about-face for the country after 4 years of far-right politics. With more than 99% of the votes tallied in the runoff vote, da Silva had 50.9% and Bolsonaro 49.1%. And the election authority said da Silva's victory was a mathematical certainty, end quote, by the AP. We'd like to add that progressive unions and community organizations in Brazil and worldwide will still be on high alert for attempted interference, including a potential coup from Bolsonaro and other fascist forces who are often backed up by the U.S. But this is a major victory for the world's peoples, and especially for Latin America, and we will be watching this closely and having updates in the future. So we wish the new president Lula well, and the workers and oppressed peoples there in Brazil well as they move forward. All right, Rick's going to talk about the Teamsters for us tonight.
All right. Yeah, real quick, just keeping an eye on the Teamsters because they're under new leadership, seeing what they have going on in their press releases, in their media room, and, of course, their union. And this week, what they released was that with a 93% voting in favor of representation, workers at the Sunnyside Dispensary in South Beloit, Illinois, have voted to join Teamsters Local 777. Congratulations to those workers. I myself am a former dispensary worker and, can testify that that job is just like any other job. It's just like retail. It's just like the retail industry, but with cannabis. So congratulations to those workers. Solidarity to you. Brian, you have a little more to say on what's going on with this, though.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of action going on with the Teamsters, including this latest victory in South Beloit. In Madison, Wisconsin, Sean O'Brien will be speaking at the state capitol on November 7th from 4 to 6 p.m. And he's the national president, or North American president of the Teamsters, Sean O'Brien. He's going to be a featured speaker at the Wisconsin Workers' Rights Power Rally. You can see Teamsters Local 200 Facebook page or call 414-771-6363 for more information. So this is, of course, before the general election, the day before, but also O'Brien is going there to hopefully issue a message that whatever the results of the election are, that we need to move forward as workers and keep up and increase the momentum that's been happening, such as a victory in Massachusetts at Cisco and the victory here in South Beloit, and in line with the Amazon and Starbucks workers, and moving forward in a direction towards potentially the escalated direct actions against UPS in the contract negotiations between UPS and the Teamsters in 2023. So we're happy that Brother O'Brien has come into Madison, Wisconsin. We wish him well, and we issue solidarity, of course, to the Workers' Rights Power Rally. And next up, then, right after that in Wisconsin, is the UAW Local 180 is still on strike, and they're moving into 7 months, and it's going to be November there this week, of course. So this means weather is getting colder. That's a long time to be on strike. Their sister local in Burlington, Iowa, is also on strike, and strikers need support with solidarity resolutions, sharing of strike information, including picket lines of support, and food and non-alcoholic beverages and gift cards. They can all be dropped off or mailed to UAW Local 180. And the address is 3323 Kearney, Kearney Avenue in Racine, Wisconsin, 53403. So you can call the Union Hall at 262-631-5980, or also see the UAW Local 180 Facebook page. So please help us support our fellow workers there on the line in Racine, Wisconsin, UAW Local 180. And now we're going to hear from Rick with the railroad workers fight back that's happening.
Yeah, that's right. Just trying to keep everyone up to date what's going on with the potential railway strike. It's a big deal in the labor movement right now. As a refresher, it would involve about 100,000 railway workers going on strike. The Railway Companies Association has come out and said that, a railway strike would cost the economy $2 billion a day. We talked about this a little more at length in our last episode. And just wanted to keep you updated because the Brotherhood of Railroad Signalmen is the second union to vote down the tentative agreement between the rail unions. The BRS, which represents over 10,000 rail workers, is one of the last three unions at the bargaining table. Overwhelmingly rejected the deal, with 39.23 of members approving and 60.57 voting not to approve. This information was taken from a CNBC article, which says that the BRS vote against ratification follows the Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way employees, so there was another union first, which voted not to ratify the tentative deal on October 10th. The article goes on to say, excuse me, in a letter released to members on Wednesday, the Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way employees president Tony Caldwell said, quote, "Before I talk about the details surrounding the bargaining process, I need to confront some fringe groups proposing dangerous ideas of unsanctioned work stoppages." Now, I decided to go directly to the website for the Brotherhood of Maintenance and Way Employees Division, of which Tony Caldwell is president. And I decided to look at that quote a little more at length. And this is the full quote from Tony Caldwell from the Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way Employees Division. Quote, "Before I talk about the details surrounding the bargaining process, I need to confront some fringe groups proposing dangerous ideas of unsanctioned work stoppages. It is true that this round of national bargaining has brought different perspectives, complicated conversations, and hard choices. A difference of views from a range of members is a good thing, even if it gets a little messy. However, we are not presented with a situation so dire that we cannot use our collective strength to obtain a satisfactory agreement without breaking the law. Not only is an unsanctioned work stoppage illegal, but an uncoordinated strike is short-sighted and will not produce the result that at least one anonymous group is claiming. Unions that have engaged in illegal strikes have been hit with catastrophic financial penalties. This could undermine the union's ability to represent and or maintain a strike if needed in future rounds of bargaining. Workers must be wary of the group throwing disruption grenades from behind a wall of secrecy. It should be clear that if this round of bargaining results in the necessity of coordinated self-help, we will engage together as one, but only after the legal process provides that option. BMWED, the union, will not support or condone an illegal work stoppage, and our bylaws prohibit strike wages or other benefits for an illegal strike." Unquote. So that's basically the response, again, from Tony Caldwell, the president of the Brotherhood of Maintenance Way Union, in response to the idea of a strike taking place that's not authorized by the leadership. And I thought it was worth highlighting that and even starting that conversation. We're not sure who that fringe group is that he's referring to, but it does bring out, an important idea or an important discussion about what a strike would look like in this day and time. As for instance, the holidays are approaching and mass consumerism is approaching. So I wanted to put that out there. But before we get into that a little deeper, Jerry also has some information to chime in with on the strike. So Jerry, what else is going on with the strike, and then we can
Hey,
talk tease it out a little.
thanks, Rick. Thanks, Rick. Had a chance to talk to a leader of Railroad Workers United, which is, I don't know if that's the fringe group that brother is talking about, but it's a very public organization. It's been around since 2008. It has national conferences that are open. The last one they had, I think, simultaneously with Labor Nuts Conference. In any event, yeah, this is big doings, Rick. Uh, because there is a real possibility that as early as November 19th, the tentative agreement that was imposed on the workers by the Presidential Emergency Railroad Board was only a temporary gesture that was tentatively approved by the heads of all the different unions. But every one of those unions uh, just happens to have rank and file workers that must approve that tentative contract in order to be a real thing, and that is just not going to happen. Already, as you mentioned, Rick, two unions constituting 30% of all the railroad workers that are unionized in the country have already voted that contract down by a percentage of 60 to 40. Um, and although there was a lot of ballyhoo about how the Biden administration and Marty Walsh saved the bacon by getting this tentative agreement, and it was, ballyhooed as this big success by our president, who was the greatest trade union president since FDR, the liberal press is saying. Despite that, this contract is going to be voted down. Uh, every one of those 12 unions has to approve it in order for it to be accepted. And that's obviously not going to happen. So what remains is what's going to happen on November 19th. And what's important about November 19th? That's when Congress reconvenes and can impose the rejected contract and order the strikers back to work. If the strikers, I mean, I shouldn't be, that's presumptuous. If the workers decide to go on strike, uh, they uh, they can be on strike for 48 hours, after which um, there will be an illegal strike in the view of the United States government. Uh, and At that time, we don't know what would happen if the strike goes on. Then there will be certainly a lot. If there is a strike and it goes on, there certainly will be a lot of pressure by the business press, which is essentially most of the public mainstream media, uh, uh, doing a lot of fear mongering about how the supply chain is going to be disrupted and all hell will break loose and the economy will collapse overnight. Uh, so that's what would happen. Another option, if the strike goes on, is that replacement workers from the U.S. Army could be brought in because the Army does drive trains and it could potentially drive trains. Uh, or There might be, and that's very small, might be scabs because uh, the only possible people that could act as scabs would be old laid off workers from the past, from the railroad unions, because it is such a highly skilled uh, occupation that very few people know how to drive a train or switch a railroad track or change a signal or do anything like that. So, um, Railroad Workers United is this caucus, cross craft crisis, caucus. Try to say that quickly. That represents hundreds and hundreds of workers who are allied with the Labor Notes Conference folks, with the Teamsters for a Democratic Union, the International Longshoremen's Warehouse Union, and United Electrical Workers. So they are getting a lot of really progressive support out there. And however, that vote against the contract, it was not brought about by some secret fringe organization somehow pulling the wool over the eyes of rank and file workers. Workers may go on strike because they do not have sick days.
Exactly.
And the contract that was imposed on them by the government, by President Biden and Secretary Marty Walsh, was a contract that did not include sick days. There were only two of these 12 unions, railroad unions, have maximum hours provisions in their individual contracts. So you could be forced to work back to back to back 12-hour, 16-hour shifts without getting a rest period. Keep that in mind. If you've ever taken a bus to a demonstration in Washington, D.C., or you've ever taken a bus across a state line in an interstate fashion, every bus driver is required to have 8 hours off before he or she is allowed to get back on that bus. Not so with our nation's railroads. Okay, so that is sort of some background of the potential strike. So I want to move on from that and bring up a successful strike of a very similar nature that happened in South Korea, where the Transport Solidarity Union, that is actually the name of the union, went on strike for a week in June. Also, having to withstand a lot of fear mongering about supply chain issues, but they won their strike, and they won it against the government. Just like this, that if a strike happens here in the States, it's going to be a strike of rank and file workers against the government and not just the corporations. So, and so it would do all of us well to do a little reading on the great 1877 railroad strike, the great so-called Great Upheaval, which has been deemed by most historians as being the greatest insurrection in the United States since the Civil War, a national railroad strike that spontaneously began in West Virginia and then moved to Baltimore, Pittsburgh, and Chicago, ending up in St. Louis. It was finally crushed when President Rutherford B. Hayes called out the U.S. Army, because the National Guard in all of the states, who was called out to suppress the strike, ended up joining the strikers, along with many unorganized workers and thousands of just general unemployed and people and citizens from all of those major metropolitan areas where the strike went through. It took the U.S. Army to suppress that strike. That's why we have National Guard armories today. National Guard armories date from the Great Railroad Strike of 1877. One more thing I want to say about that strike is that it was crushed by Rutherford B. Hayes, the disgusting president who sold out Reconstruction in the presidential election of 1876 when he agreed to let two Southern states have their electors certified in the House of Representatives when the Electoral College vote was held up and subject to a lot of controversy. In exchange, he was a Republican. In exchange for agreeing to withdraw U.S. troops from the South in 1877, he secured the electoral votes of two Southern states. This is the same Rutherford B. Hayes that ordered the U.S. Army out to shoot down and kill strikers, and at least 40 to 50 strikers were killed during that strike. So that's I'm going to end what I have to say in just a quick historical note, inspired by the president of the CIO, Mr. Brother Van Dusen, who in Philadelphia at the National Convention of the AFL-CIO a few months ago had a resolution read to the attendees from the floor, which called for all unions to immediately start organizing anti-fascist brigades. Now, the word fascism has been crept into ordinary political discourse on the TV talk shows lately, so it would do us well to remember that when Adolf Hitler became chancellor in 1933, the first thing he did when given total powers by the Reichstag was to uh, order arrested 100,000 communists, social democrats, and other radicals and imprisoned them in concentration camps. After that, he went after the trade unions 3 months after that and arrested and occupied all the trade union offices and abolished all trade unions in Germany. Uh, let's get together, folks, and be strong with our unions. Never let something like that happen here. And that's all I got. Thanks.
No, that's right. Like, thank you, Jerry. You know, and like you said, the capitalist media, the corporate media, man, they're really crying that the sky is falling with this, man. Here, another article that I happened to notice was by CNN, and if I may quote from that a little bit, that a strike would create massive problems for the U.S. economy, snarling still struggling supply chains, as you mentioned, and triggering widespread bottlenecks and shortages. About 30% of U.S. freight, when measured by weight and distance traveled, moves by rail. Prices of goods from gasoline to food to cars could soar if trains halt. In addition, factories could be forced to shut down temporarily to part shortages. Goods that consumers want to buy during the holiday season could be missing from store shelves. Good Lord. Yeah, that sounds like total catastrophe. So does a $2 billion a day price tag that the American Association of Railroads came up with. All of this sounds catastrophic. But again, what are the workers asking for? Sick days. Sick days. Man, this could be resolved, again, as we've said on this show before, this could be resolved real easily. These workers are asking for sick days in the days of corona pandemics. They're making sense. They're making sense. So that's what's at stake. And I think that reveals just how greedy, the owners of the railways can be, just how greedy corporate America can be. I mean, think about it. If they're really this panicked, yeah, give them sick days. What they call Black Friday is right around the corner. And if this strike takes place November 19th, all the mass consumerism that takes place the Friday after Thanksgiving, will and can be affected. Why not just give these folks sick days? Simple as that. No matter how you crunch the numbers. It's not going to be no $2 billion a day. And kudos to them for demanding that, right? Because, yeah, if you know that your labor contributes to $2 billion a day to the economy, yeah, ask for more, actually. Now that you may have the leverage of November 19th. So we'll keep you and everyone posted on what's going on with the railway strike. Thank you, everyone, again, for listening to We Rise Fighting. We're going to take a quick break, listen to some music by Fruit of Labor, come back at you, and we will start an interview with Angaza, Sababu Laughing House, and Nathanette Mayo, both of which are from the United Electrical Workers, Local 150, and Black Workers for Justice. So thank you, everyone, for listening. We will be right back after this.
Tell you where we stand against deportations, against building walls, against racist police. When justice speaks, you know you better stop and listen. When justice speaks. When justice speaks. When justice speaks. When justice speaks, you know you better stop and listen.
Okay, I'm Nathanette Mayo. I'm a longtime member of Black Workers for Justice. I've been a member for about 35 years. The organization, we're celebrating our 40 years of being a Black worker-led organization here in North Carolina. So I've been around 35 years. I'm also a member of the North Carolina Public Service Workers Union, UE 150, and certainly work with the organizing of that union. Before it was North Carolina Public Service Workers Union, when we were North Carolina Public Service Workers Network, and even before that, when we were the North Carolina Public Workers Network Organizing Committee. So from the very beginning, that, and also a member of the Fruit of Labor Singing Ensemble, which is the cultural arm of Black Workers for Justice, using putting messages in our music and using music as a soundtrack for the movement to encourage the movement. And also have been, started off also as being active in my community with our the Shiloh community, which is in Western Wake County in North Carolina, right beside the Research Triangle Park, which is the second largest research and development park in the country outside of Silicon Valley. So fighting for self-determination of that community, and also fighting against contamination by big corporations, water contamination, and in that community there. So over the years, it's been a lot that's been going on. I've joined Black Workers for Justice when I was about 21 years old, when I became affiliated with Black Workers for Justice. So it's been a long time.
And what was it that drew you into Black Workers for Justice?
I became aware of Black Workers for Justice when they were organizing, and Angaza here was one of the organizers, working on making ML King holiday a federal holiday. And there was a lot of work being done, petitions that were being gathered and signed and taken to DC. There was a huge march that was going on in DC at that time. And so I ran into a fundraiser that Black Workers for Justice was having around getting people to DC for pushing the Congress to go ahead and make ML King Day a federal holiday. So that was where I first ran into Black Workers for Justice.
Got it. Okay. And I'm asking both of you now, your own backgrounds, like your own political backgrounds, or should I say like your own upbringing, maybe, like, how your upbringing was intertwined with politics. Like, were your parents political at all? Were they activists? Were they union members? Were they just involved in the community or anything? If you could speak to that a little bit.
So I'm from, like I said, the Shiloh community, which is a small, predominantly African-American community that was in Western Wake County in North Carolina. And it was a community that was formed at the close of the Civil War, when Black folks were asked to leave the white church. Shiloh means a place of refuge, and we formed the community in the Brush Harbor there. The residents, there were about 10 families initially in the community who were able to amass 100 acres each. And so it was a farming community. The community had a co-op, were very self-dependent, and was a very strong functioning community. My mother and father, my mother was growing up, being the independent community that we were not a city or a town, but we're a community, but still fighting for self-determination. My mother was very active in terms of in the rural areas. They have the county has this thing called the Home Cooperative Extension Service. And so they have a women's home extension service and a men's one that men participate in. My mother was very active in that. And for us, it was code for being political, because a lot of political work got done in those women home extension club meetings, a lot of community organizing. In fact, it was in that one of the women home extension club meetings that we in turn brought Angaza in to help with organizing the Shiloh community around, keeping the Research Triangle Park from stealing land from people, and keeping the state and the county from running roads through the community and displacing several homes. It was 43 homes that they wanted to displace. And also in fighting with this Coppers company it became an international company that was responsible for poisoning the water in the community, and also responsible for a lot of health damage done to the workers at that plant, who were also union members. My father worked at that plant, and he was a union member of the the Order of Carpenter Brothers. So they were active in, in the 60s, segregation and ending segregation, even in that small rural town. My mother was very active she was a lunch lady, very active in making sure that Black students had what we needed when integration occurred in the white schools in Wake County. And also, didn't mind going up and grabbing somebody by the collar. She actually went down to the Wake County offices, and because they refused to come and pick up Black students down this dirt road that we lived on. And by the end of that week, we had buses coming down. She had no problems with, organized a walkout of the lunch ladies at the school, which was predominantly Black women who worked in the cafeteria, and working class white women, poor working class white women too, that were being abused in the workplace, and they ran a cafeteria for a number of years without a manager, and then they all of a sudden wanted to bring a manager in because they said Black women and poor white women couldn't run a cafeteria, and the manager ended up firing one of the women because all of the women would give their juice to this woman who had many children to take home with her, and she was saying, no, you can't do that. If you do it, we're going to fire the woman who you're giving the juice to. They ended up firing the woman, and my mother organized the walkout. So that's the stock that I come from, fighting when there aren't unions, when they do have unions and the unions aren't fighting, but being taught that we have to stand up and we have to fight and we have to struggle, and the only way change is going to come is if we do that. So that's my background.
Yeah.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Angaza Sababu Laughing House, one of the founding members of Black Workers for Justice 40 years ago, and one of the founding members of the North Carolina Public Service Workers Union, UE 150, 25 years ago, and a founding member of the Southern Workers Assembly way back in 2012, I'm sorry. Want to just state that on a month or two ago, we lost one of the pillars of Black Workers for Justice, our beloved comrade, Brother Saladin Muhammad. And he was an unbelievable pillar and visionary who was able to help us not only study theory, but try to apply it. As you all know, many of us came out of the Black Power movement of the late 60s and early 70s, myself included. We opposed the war in Vietnam. So in high school, I was a part of the student mobilization against the war in Vietnam. Also a member of the African American Students Association, which was popping up in all the high schools. And from there on, growing up in New York, one of the very diverse political spaces around the country with many organizations, I had an opportunity to meet some unbelievable, legendary leaders, such as Jim Horton of Harlem Fight Back, who wrote a piece called "The Centrality of Black Workers," which I know that Black Workers for Justice built on that theory and its work, and also other leaders like Judu Ayusi and Amir Baraka, and a host of other great Black leaders. That led me, because of my parents' activism, in terms of self-determination and self-reliance in the Black communities there in New York City, where I lived, in Brooklyn, South Bronx, Harlem. It sort of rubbed off on me and my brothers that we needed to make some contribution or provide some service to our community. And we learned that service is empowering our community, building power. And one great example that led me to meeting Saladin Muhammad, Abdul Kalamat, and many other great leaders, Kwame Ture, aka Stokely Carmichael, and others, was the African Liberation Support Committee work that we did in struggling against the oppression and colonialization of the various African nations. That began to help us sharpen what we were fighting against, because they were certainly fighting against capitalism, imperialism, neo-colonialism. And I think that movement helped us begin to understand what Black liberation must mean to everyday Black workers, particularly understanding that we were struggling against a system, not just for reforms, but struggling against a system of oppression, a system of white supremacy, a system of exploitation. We're struggling against multinational corporations, corporate imperialism. Some people say racial capitalism. So that became very clear to me in the 70s as we began to meet and work with other organizations that had similar outlooks, including many of the revolutionary Pan-Africanist and national Black national organizations. That led me to working with various organizations that were fighting against discrimination in the construction trades. I'm a former member of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 3, when I came out of high school, and later on joined various other unions, and had an opportunity to work with a group called Youth Organization for Black Unity, also known as Sababu, the Student Organization for Black Unity, where I met Nelson Johnson, John Mendez, Owusu Sadaki, and many other Black revolutionaries who were beginning to study the science, as we call it, of dialectical historical materialism. And we were trying to figure out, how does this relate in a practical way to our work? And that answer came with my meeting up with a well-known revolutionary by the name of Saladin Muhammad. First ran into him in 1972, had a chance to reconnect with him in the early 80s, and was honored to be one of the founding members, along with Naima Muhammad and brother, what we call Babatunde Abner Berry, aka Abner Berry, and a host of other seasoned organizers and revolutionaries. And that was my beginning of an unbelievable journey, which hasn't ended yet, of the development of Black Workers for Justice and the work that we've been doing in UE for the last 25 years, and with Black Workers for Justice for 40, and the Southern Workers Assembly. Boy, we're going on our 10th anniversary. And it's an honor to be working with all these great sisters, brothers, and comrades in this work that I've been doing. And I've been learning a lot from them, learning an awful lot.
Okay. And in your work, obviously we hear a lot of racial justice work being intertwined with the labor movement. And I guess I'm asking you this for the benefit of younger workers or people who may be new to the labor movement. But what can you say to that about the need for the labor movement to be intertwined with other social justice movements? Do y'all have any particular nuggets of wisdom or anything that felt particularly inspiring or empowering? Or if you could just speak to that for the benefit of someone who may be new to the labor movement.
Well, with us, because we are here in North Carolina, we don't have collective bargaining. We're still trying to get rid of General Statute 9598, which denies us the power to collectively bargain
Public sector.
In the public sector. We, in the organizing that we do, we couldn't just do it as union. We have to be creative in how we do organizing. And finding out too that our brand of unionism is social justice unionism. So that means that we're not just concerned with what happens in the workplace to workers in the workplace. We see that we work in a workplace that in turn affects our communities too, because some of these companies are poisoning our communities, and we have to deal with that. We work in workplaces where since you don't have collective bargaining, you have to be creative in how you deal with problems on the job. With the public sector here in North Carolina, especially, I worked in the city of Durham. So it was important that the workers, we didn't have a paid president or a paid staff that we depended to go out and deal with the bosses for us. We had to learn to do that ourselves. Workers we had to study policy. We had to creatively come up with strategies that we would use in the job to make sure that, we were safe on the job, to make sure that, the disciplinary actions that took place in Durham, we found that a lot of Black workers were getting more harsh discipline for things that white workers got nothing done to them for. So we had to deal with ways to come up with strategies on how to fight that. So building the intersections, we had to work with the community in the city of Durham. Like, for example, our sanitation workers go out every day on a route. The people that they pick up garbage for, they know them pretty much. So when we were fighting with the city, with the city council for increased wages, for increased limiting costs in healthcare, we took flyers, on a Saturday after, when we're not working, we took the routes of the sanitation workers, and we went out and we passed out flyers to the community and talked to the community about what was happening on the job, to build support for them to come to city council and fight for their city workers. And in turn, because we live in these communities, we know what those communities are lacking, whether it be parks and recreation facilities, whether it be sidewalks, whether it be repairing housing, dilapidated housing, or helping to improve housing, and that we could take those struggles back to the city council. And when we did our yearly budget proposals to the city council, we included those community struggles in our proposal and in our demands that we presented to the city council. And in turn, residents from the community would come and speak up on behalf of city workers during the public speak out session of city council meetings. And they would write letters to the city council people. They would go call the city manager on behalf of public workers. So we were able to, we understood that, our struggle was not separate from the community struggle. And if we wanted to make better communities, we had to make better workplaces. And if we had better workplaces, we could certainly make our communities better in turn too. So those are some of the ways that we used to, reasons why we had to connect community struggles with workplace struggles.
I think also very important in terms of the Black Workers for Justice program, when we had our first Black Workers Assembly in December 1982. That's when we were founded as a statewide organization. We tried to anchor our thinking, our strategic thinking, in this issue of the centrality of the Black workers. Too often, labor movements are moving without centering Black workers. The reason we think this is very important is, number one, Black workers in the South continue to be one of the most oppressed sectors. And today, it's also along with many of our Latinx brothers and sisters who are migrating and immigrating here to the South. But we understood that, the centrality of the Black workers, why the most oppressed sectors had to lead the movement. Only then we understood that we were able to challenge the systemic racism, the white supremacy, and start also connect up these Black workers to the Black freedom movement, the Black liberation movement, and also to draw lessons in terms of the international struggle of oppressed, Africans and oppressed people of color around the world. We understood and we studied, don't forget. Too often people don't think that organizers, activists, and members, they have to study if we're going to understand, what we're up against. We're going to have to study in order to begin to make the kind of strategic assessments that are needed. One of the other things we did as Black workers in the South is we began to realize that the overwhelming majority of Black people, pretty close to 90%, if not more, are Black workers. Therefore, Black workers serve a strategic place in our communities, in our workplaces, in our communities. This became even more apparent during the pandemic. When you were talking about essential workers, the essential workers were 45% Black and people of color. it was pretty close to 65% women. We were the people processing the meat, taking the garbage, and disposing of it, fixing the water sewer systems, providing clean water. If you look in all the municipalities, if you look in all the private sectors, you'll see that the essential workers were easily, overwhelmingly Black and brown people, and overwhelmingly 65% or more women workers. So our work and our strategic assessment and organizing that we've been doing over 40 years is always centered this understanding of the centrality of Black workers in the workplace and leading the labor movement, playing a leading role, and also in the freedom and Black liberation movement, our struggle for self-determination, our struggle for power. And finally, the question of building zones of political power. I want to thank our belated comrade Saladin Muhammad for all of his contributions in helping us grasp this a lot deeper. That we can't win anything without having zones of power. If we're not very well organized with a real progressive and a radical program that can create resistance and transformation in the workplace, we'll never win this long-term protracted struggle. If we're not very well organized in various communities and areas, like down in Jackson, Mississippi, where Brother Chokwe Lumumba and others were building people's assemblies to begin to build power in Jackson and other southern regions. But like we're doing here in North Carolina over the last 40 years, or in Georgia, we are building community zones of political power where we have actual influence, where we can challenge, the powers that be and the policies that they try to shove down our throats as working people, as oppressed people of color and Blacks, and also zones of power in our workplaces. Some people said in Gaza, we heard that there were 3 or 4 strikes of public sector workers in North Carolina. How can you do that when the law says that they're illegal? We did it anyway. If you have bases of putting zones of political power, you don't only have strength in your workplace, which why we were organizing the UE 150, North Carolina Public Service Workers Union, but we also organized broader community organizations and coalitions. So we have the community to come to bear. So when we had our strike in 2006 in Raleigh, people are saying, man, why didn't anyone get arrested? The workers didn't take the trucks out for 2 days. And the only thing you guys got was you forced the city councils to meet with you. You even had the mayor riding on the back of the truck to see how bad the conditions were. You made him ride on the back of the sanitation truck. This shows the correctness of how we have to take theory. And we know there's all these revolutionaries and their understanding of dialectical, historical, materialism, this, that, and the other political theory. What good is it unless we can figure out how do we use it to build power? How do we use it to build zones of political power in our workplaces, in our community? And I'm grateful to our belated comrade, and I keep speaking of him. I met him in 1972 for the very first time during the African liberation work we were doing back in the early 70s. And who would know that I would run back into him again in North Carolina. I came down here to work on Ku Klux Klan cases on November 3rd, 1979. Some people know that as the historic Klan massacre, the Greensboro massacre, where the Klan murdered 5 people in a Black community here in Greensboro, North Carolina, known as the Greensboro Massacre. And knowing the role of the FBI and Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and the police that had infiltrated the Klan and was responsible for why this tragedy took place, and the anti-communism against anyone who's organizing unions in North Carolina put an unbelievable chill on the whole community. And I found solace in the thinking of Brother Baba Sufu and Saladin and Naima and members of a group of Black revolutionaries, Black working class revolutionaries who were really grounded and had some really grounded thinking in terms of how do we get out of this moment and move forward to continue to organize workplaces and communities. And as you know, here we are 40 years later. We got a whole wave of newer, younger leaders. We're thankful for them. The old ones are fading on, but hopefully we're passing on what experiences we have. And it's an honor have been serving as a leader in the Black Workers for Justice over the last 40 years, and in the North Carolina Public Service Workers Union, UE Local 150, as these young leaders take on the challenges ahead, which are even more challenging, I think, than the challenges we had to take on for the first 40 years.
And I think one of the aspects of that too is this idea of pre-majority unions that were developed here in North Carolina, specifically with the Rocky Mount engine plant. You don't have to have a union election to say that you're a union, because if you want to be organized and you want to build power, then you organize and you build power. We don't have to have anybody signing off to officially recognize us. If we want organization, then workers have to be bold enough and bad enough to build their organization. With our union, we try to have regular political education where we talk about different strategies that we see going on around the world, that we've learned from some of these meetings, that international meetings that we've been able to attend, that we've seen. And we went to Brazil and met with workers who were the union public workers there who were with the Workers' Party, but also worked with participatory budgeting, got the first glance of that. And we took that back to the city of Durham. It took us roughly 20 years, but now the city of Durham has some semblance of beginning to have a participatory budgeting process where workers and the community have a direct input on how money is spent in their communities, what projects are done, what is done in there with the tax dollars that are collected from them. So this idea of pre-majority unions, be organizing anyway, organizing in spite of whether you win election or whether you don't win an election, you still are what you say you are, and you just have to be creative in how you function. Like we had to learn policies and deal with policies and develop strategies and build the alliances that support the demands that we have in the workplace.
Yes, we also sent some of our members to Caracas, Venezuela. Boy, did we meet some revolutionary trade unionists there. Unbelievable lessons learned from many of the workers there. Had an opportunity to sit and talk with them, go to their meetings. You'll never see anything in the U.S. or rarely see anything in the U.S. with that kind of rank and file membership power in their union. As you know, their union staff are not paid staff. We had a chance to meet when we were in Porto Alegre, Brazil at the World Social Forum. We had a chance to meet with the Workers' Party leaders there. And again, we found out that many of their leaders weren't paid staff. They were just volunteering after work. And it's amazing how much stronger their unions were. Also had a chance to meet with the African, the CASATU, the South African trade unionists. Mm-hmm. They were laughing at many of our unions here in the U.S. that have all these highly paid staff folk, but yet, they have some staff, but they make no more than the workers that they serve, no more. As y'all know, that is UE's national UE, the United Electrical Radio Machinist Workers, in their constitution, that our national officers can make no more money than the highest paid members who are on the line working day to day. That I know Nathanette and I have both been presidents of our local here in North Carolina. We've never got paid anything, full-time, we worked our regular jobs, and like we're doing tonight on a Sunday, rather than hanging with our children or grandchildren or nieces and nephews, we're here working. So this is the culture of these, what I call revolutionary social movement unionism, which is the kind of unionism that we're going to need in this period. And we see it developing. We see it with Amazon workers organizing across the country. We see it with the Starbucks workers. We saw it with AT&T. But too often, I think unions come in, and rather than encourage this brand of union building from the bottom up, rank and file, they bring too many professional staff folk in, and they don't see the creativity of the workers in terms of the initial organizing that these workers did to get to the starting point of building their own organizing committees. Right now in North Carolina, Black Workers for Justice is working with the Southern Workers Assembly and the North Carolina Public Service Workers Union, UE 150, and we're building this style of unionism amongst Amazon workers right here in North Carolina. We think it's very important, and we think if you want to learn more, you should go to southernworkers.org, southernworkers.org, and go to our website or just Google Southern Workers Assembly, and you'll see the sort of worker schools, and you'll see the methodology that we try to use, which encourage community members to volunteer to help us flyer. As you said, Ryan, 5 o'clock in the morning, we had some people out there doing that flyering. We didn't get paid. We weren't professional staff. We just did the work before we went to work. I'm still working. Nathanette's still working. We're still out there working.
We would
regular
go
jobs.
flyer in the mornings at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and then be at our job by 8 o'clock. You know, so then when we get off, we catch the second shift that's somewhere else and flyer there. So it's depending on self and not depending on staff. Although staff has their role too, but you know, the ultimate power building has to be done by the workers themselves. We are the leaders. We have to certainly educate each other and certainly learn from struggles from other unions and other worker organizations and other community organizations across the country and across the world. But we ultimately have to take the power for ourselves.
Yeah, so I have a question. It's kind of a multi-part question, some of which you've already mentioned. And we're honored to have you on here. Speaking of Brother Muhammad and the rest of you in Black Workers for Justice, the tremendous ideological and organizing contributions. I was down there with other folks in the summer of 12 for the March on Wall Street South. And then we formed the Southern Workers Assembly and all the gains and advances that have come out of that. But just speak, if you could speak to the grounding of like the Southern Workers Assembly in terms of the role of the U.S. South, because when we went back, a lot of us were from like, you know, quote unquote, northern states in the Midwest or East or West. And there was like hardly any understanding at all of the role of the U.S. South in terms of capitalism today. You know, we had the March on Wall Street South in Charlotte, the second largest banking concentration, finance capital in the country, the military bases, all the Fortune 500 companies that are based in the South, and the strategic moves of U.S. capitalism to the South, but also the great organizing work that you are doing in response to that with the methods that you just mentioned. And that's kind of the first part question. The second was the lessons that could be and really are so critical in our view to the states right now, like Wisconsin, Indiana, Iowa, who have just been shredded by the capitalists in terms of eviscerating a lot of gains that have been won over the last 80 years, such as collective bargaining, among other things, and all kinds of austerity. But even in that climate, you all have shown that even in some of the most intense conditions in the South, that we can organize and we can advance in those conditions through the methods that you're suggesting. And just some of the suggestions you have for some of those folks. For example, like in Wisconsin, classified workers can organize on assemblies or whatever the example would be. So if you could just expand on that a bit, that'd be great. Thanks.
I think you did a great job sharing some of the economic and political landscape in the Southern region. There's probably as many unions in the state of New York as all 13 Southern states. As we also know, a lot of these factories are in very rural areas in the South. They do this, corporations do this intentionally. They know we're going to be weaker in those areas. There won't be much to draw upon in terms of building a labor support movement around the workers when they start taking on these big, huge corporations. As we also know, the auto industry and the auto parts industry has relocated in at least 8 of the Southern states, including North Carolina, where they were building Cummins engines, South Carolina, where they were building various vehicles, in Georgia, and certainly Amazon, you name it, they're going to put those big plants not in the heart of Raleigh. They're going to put them out in Garner, North Carolina, some rural, unheard of town, or they're going to put them in Bessemer, Alabama, or places. So they know what they're doing. So we have to have some sort of strategic assessment about these corporations, about where are they trying to locate these plants, and we got to have some sort of strategic assessment on how do we build in these rural areas, and can we wait for unions to come? So way back in the 80s, one of the most important strategic organizing campaigns led by Saladin, and not Saladin, but he contributed as a visionary to helping us put together a school, a worker school back in the 80s, where we began mapping out the importance of organizing in the South. And as an organization, we all studied and began mapping out a Organize the South tour, where we toured the Northeast, the Middle Atlantic states, the Midwest, and we were bringing Southern workers who were part of organizing committees in various locations, private and public, to these large urban areas that had unions, because that was their first exposure to unions. And at the same time, we were teaching and sharing with the union, rank and file union leaders, including some of their big union officials, the importance of organizing in the South. And we made a call for them to come South. I mean, who would ever think they would respond to a small group of Black workers that were organizing workplace committees? And as you know, shortly after the 80s, more and more unions began to come South. UAW, the United Food Commercial Workers Union, ASME, who is now in Virginia. There's lots of these unions who came South due to that organizing campaign that we use to educate Southern workers and also to educate Northern workers through these tours of bringing van loads of Southern workers north.
To interject, it was also, not just letting Southern workers or workers from North Carolina see what unions were like in the Northeast or Midwest, but getting workers from the Northeast and Midwest and West to understand that the South is a pull on workers' rights and wages, and that workers that were unionized in those particular areas, because all of the companies, they moved to the South before they went international. So understanding that because healthcare was rising, costs for healthcare in the Northeast, and if workers were threatening to strike there, then they were being threatened with the company moving South and all the capital moving South because of the regulations, very few regulations in terms of the movement of capital, very few regulations in terms of the environment, so companies could do what they wanted to with the waste that they had. Certainly very few laws supporting workers. In fact, the police actively and security actively fighting and following workers and intimidating workers who were trying to organize. But just getting workers in the North to understand that if you don't support organizing in the South and you don't support workers in the South, then you're shooting yourself in the foot, because ultimately you're going to have to pay for not supporting workers in the South. And we see that in terms of even now, like the collective bargaining, right to work being pushed in northern states, other states, because of the freedom that they had down here in the South and how they did it so long without any challenge. So part of that was just educating us as Southern workers, but also educating Northern workers on why they needed to be vigilant with their international unions to get them to organize in the South too.
The South has always been the Achilles heel of the entire U.S. labor movement. That long legacy of slavery, Jim Crow, segregation, weak labor laws, their disenfranchising and taking away voting rights, which is going on right now. This is how they begin to build even more power against everyday workers. And too often, our white brothers and sisters don't understand when there's an attack on the voting rights of African Americans and also migrant workers. And when there's an attack on immigrant workers, it's really an attack on all workers, because all of these rights, voting rights, immigrant rights, worker rights, are all human rights that every worker needs to stand up and defend at all costs, because it weakens the labor movement when we don't see the inherent connection between these other pillars of the labor movement and the various sectors that we work in.
So I think Rick has a question about the role of cultural workers, mentioning for hundreds of years, from slavery to Mr. John Coltrane and Miss Nina Simone in North Carolina, and today to your work as Fruit of Labor. So, Rick, I think you had a question regarding the Fruit of Labor Ensemble.
That is my question. If you could tell us about your musical project. I love that you referred to it as the musical, the cultural wing of Black Workers for Justice. Note taken. If you could speak to that a little bit, what that means exactly. The message behind your project, your album. It's called State of Emergency. Just fill us in. How is music connected to all of this?
Say something about Baba Sufu.
So even at the founding of Black Workers for Justice, Abner Berry pushed the understanding that you cannot have a movement without culture. That culture inspires, people get tired. Culture inspires people. Culture motivates people to continue the struggle. Culture also documents the history of that struggle. A lot of the songs that the Fruit of Labor that we write and that we perform, especially our own music, comes directly out of struggles that our members have been a part of, that Black Workers for Justice has been a part of. When I was telling you about the lunch ladies, the song I'd Rather Sit Home is the story of those lunch ladies walking out of that cafeteria and the boss begging them to come back. So all the songs that we write come directly out of a lot of the struggles that we've been involved in.
Never Again is a good example.
Never Again is a song that we wrote about the Hamlet Imperial Food Fire here in North Carolina, where the workers got burned. And it was the first time that a plant owner has been sent to jail for the negligence and their responsibility and culpability in the killing of those workers in that
25
workers plant, in that chicken poultry plant, by locking the doors. So the understanding with the founding members, the understanding that we had to use culture to speak to the experience of our workers here in our communities here in the South. Like I said, the movement has to have a soundtrack, and Fruit of Labor is just one of those organizations. We call ourselves the Cultural Workers Organization because we talk about the music that we produce. We sit down and look at the struggles and talk about the experiences that we're having in our workplaces, in our communities, and develop songs, like I said, specifically based on that. But it's a conscious effort. It's not something that's frivolous to us. We sit down and we study. We either study what's happening in the world, and we study, what's happening in North Carolina, what's happening in the rest of the country. But all of that is included in the music that we produce, that we do. So it's important to us, and it was important with the organization to make sure that culture was incorporated. Like I said, the movement has to have a soundtrack. Every hero has a theme song. So we consider ourselves labor heroes, workers are heroes. So we have to produce the theme songs for those, the explosive work that's being done here in the South.
We can't go on without plugging ourselves in the next 5 minutes, since I know you're going to be closing us down in a minute. How much more time do we have?
As much as time as you got.
All right. Well, we want to definitely give a plug. We'd like everyone to go to fruitoflabor.org. And when you go there, in the header, you'll see music. And you'll see that we compose, write the lyrics of all of our music. We have 4 or 5 albums, but you'll see the latest album entitled State of Emergency, with some unbelievable, one guy says, man, you guys sing it all. You do jazz, you do hip hop, you do go-go.
We do reggae, we do country.
We do salsa.
And that's exactly what I loved about it. I heard all that, man. I listened like 5 minutes. I was like, heard all that. Wow, that was cool. Yeah.
So we do it all. We know that the workers, the communities that we come out of are very diverse, and we do it all. We do it all.
Fruitoflabor.org.
Fruitoflabor.org. Make sure you check that out.
And we're also available for fundraisers for many of these progressive organizations around the country. You name it, we've been there. San Francisco, we just played at the RWDSU. That's the Retail workers that were organizing Bessemer. We played at their national convention, and also we played at Labor Notes on a few occasions, and a host of other union conventions, and also civil rights organizations, marches, demonstrations, the Million Workers March. You name it, we're available. And if you need some fundraising, I'll guarantee you we'll have everybody partying and throwing their money in the basket.
Definitely, definitely. You know, it's funky and righteous, man. Yeah.
So you can find it on Apple Music, iTunes, all of the usual spots for downloading and streaming music.
And that diva you hear is Nathanette there, sitting over here to my right. And the boom boom man, I'm known as the boom boom man. I'm the bass baritone that you hear on those CDs. But really, we're willing to travel, willing to help you raise funds. Give us a call, email us, fruitoflaborwcc@netscape.com, or call us at our Fruit of Labor World Cultural Center office, 919-876-7187, or just go to fruitoflabor.org.
So we see it as our responsibility. It is our mission to make sure that we document the struggles that are happening here. So that is us, and also with our cultural center here in our cultural commission, looking, we work with the other artists, whether they be musicians, visual artists, dancers, videographers, to look at whatever the art is that we're doing, making sure that we are supporting those struggles in our communities, and that whatever we're producing we're doing it to benefit our communities, to make our communities better, make our workplaces better. So looking at what you do and making sure that it has a purpose and it's uplifting.
Whether it's visual art, as you see back behind us, or when you come through the center. Matter of fact, go to fruitoflabor.org, you'll go through a virtual tour. You'll see all kind of political art hanging on the walls. Or whether it's poetry, prose, drama, song, or just playing music. We try to encourage activists to use it in this long, protracted struggle to keep the fighting spirit up, and to also tell our stories as workers. Workers are the makers of history. That's what we try to share through the culture.
That's what's up. All right. Well, Nathanette and Angaza, I think we'll leave off the show with some of your music. And thank you for sharing some time with us. If there's anything you would like to say in closing, perhaps, because we've covered a lot of ground, anything you're particularly inspired by that's happening in the world of labor right now. We've already talked about a little bit about Amazon workers and Starbucks workers, certainly them. But anything that particularly inspires you, and any last words or golden nuggets of wisdom for the folks involved in those struggles.
Keep on fighting, keep on uniting, build the power of the working class. Let's remember the very important role in terms of the centrality of the Black workers that played. Let's also be on the front lines in terms of fighting for immigrant rights as human rights. And let's also not forget that we got to continue to fight against patriarchy and this homophobia that the right keeps pushing. And also would like people to contact us to purchase some of our literature, which is online at thefruitoflabor.org. You'll see where it says merchandise, particularly the Black working class, the Southern Workers Assembly. We have literature online, and you can buy hard copy if you wish. And also, you got to buy our CD. That's how we raise money. We don't get paid. We use that to raise money to keep the center open. So buy the CD, State of Emergency.
And also, just encouraging workers to understand that no matter how small you may think you are, it is the workers that do make history. It is the workers, even a small organization of workers grows into large thing. The Fight for 15 struggle started small, and you look at fast food workers, and now it's a nationwide campaign and standard, $15 to start with. Certainly that's not a living wage in most of the country, but start there, and that has, you force the conversation. So the power that workers have, no matter whether they're formally organized, but when they come together to fight and to struggle, they can make change.
Well, thank you both. Thank you both so much. This has been incredibly insightful. We're going to leave folks off with a little bit of fruit of labor. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in again. We'll be back next week with more labor news. And also next week, we will talk about how strikes are won. So good night, everybody, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.